Welcome back to another explainer. Okay, today we are doing a complete and frankly totally shocking financial autopsy of a brand you've probably seen in the freezer aisle. We're talking about Rebel Creamery. They are a massive, massive player in the keto ice cream space. And they seemingly went from stocking shelves nationwide to, bam, filing for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection almost overnight. So we're going to look at exactly how this happened, step by step, and I'll show you why the underlying cause actually has absolutely nothing to do with supply chains or bad recipes. It's actually something way more unexpected. All right, let's dive right into this. The catalyst for this entire corporate crisis really boils down to one staggering number, $23,785,000. That is the massive federal court judgment that was handed down against Rebel Creamery, which ultimately triggered their Chapter 11 filing on August 14th, 2026. I mean, just sit with that number for a second, right? For a mid-sized consumer packaged goods brand, getting hit with a sudden liability of nearly $24 million, that is a totally catastrophic, earth-shattering event. Section 1. A shocking bankruptcy filing and the cost of a packaging dispute. So to really understand how we got here, we gotta look at the major players. Rebel Creamery, they're a Utah-based company, and they found massive success getting their keto-friendly ice cream into absolute retail heavyweights, places like Walmart, Kroger, Safeway. But as I mentioned, their downfall wasn't a bad recipe or, an unpaid supplier. Nope, it was a really bitter dispute with a major competitor, rival brand Leeuwen Ice Cream. Which honestly brings us to the central mystery of this explainer. How exactly does an ice cream brand end up here? How does a seemingly simple, happy product generate a business-threatening liability of this magnitude? Investors and competitors across the entire food industry are paying very, very close attention to this because the answer reveals a major hidden danger in the consumer goods world. Moving on to Section 2, the packaging legal battle, focusing on trade dress and visual identity. Okay, so the answer lies in something called trade dress. Let's go back to 2021. Leeuwen actually sued Rebel over the appearance of their packaging. Specifically, they pointed out Rebel's use of pastel, monochromatic colors, black script lettering, matching lids, just that whole overall minimalist aesthetic. Essentially, Leeuwen argued that Rebel's packaging looked so similar that it was actually causing consumer confusion. Now, Leeuwen initially went after Rebel's profits to the tune of $36.4 million. Wow. However, the final court award was reduced to the $23.785 million we talked about a minute ago. So why the big drop? Well, the court determined that a significant portion of Rebel's sales were really just driven by the massive consumer demand for keto and better-for-you ice cream rather than solely because of the disputed packaging. But look, even with that reduction, it was still an absolute gut punch of a financial blow. Fast forward to July, and U.S. District Judge Eric Comity delivered the ruling, outright declaring that Rebel had engaged in intentional infringement and dilution of trade dress. But guys, here's where it goes from being just a really bad financial problem to a full-blown operational nightmare. The judge didn't just slap Rebel with a massive fine. Oh no. He ordered them to stop selling products with the confusing packaging immediately and forced them to redesign the whole thing. Just look at this timeline. It perfectly illustrates the sheer panic and the incredible speed at which this crisis unfolded. On August 12th, Rebel filed an official appeal against the court's decision, trying to fight back against the judgment. And then, literally just 2 days later, on August 14th, they filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. It is a razor-thin, incredibly dramatic 2-day turnaround. It shows you exactly how disruptive a legal judgment of this scale can be to a company's immediate operational stability. It just turns everything upside down. Section 3, the balance sheet problem and a $10.07 million gap. Now, this whole saga isn't just about a legal loss. It's about what actually happens when a massive, completely unexpected liability crashes headfirst into a company's balance sheet. According to their own filings, Rebel Creamery has reported assets of approximately $13.78 million. But their reported liabilities absolutely tower over that at $23.85 million. Think about that. That means their liabilities are roughly 73% higher than their assets. It creates this massive, undeniable $10.07 million gap. And crucially, that $23.8 million Leeuwen judgment, that makes up nearly all of their fixed unsecured liabilities. The math simply didn't work anymore. But here's a really crucial point. Rebel isn't completely empty-handed here. While that liability gap is definitely terrifying, their $13.78 million in assets actually paints a slightly more hopeful picture. They still have about $5.65 million sitting there in actual ice cream inventory, $5.22 million in cash and cash equivalents, and another $2.59 million in accounts receivable. So, they have real money, real product, and real retail distribution. They are very much still an operating business. They aren't just a hollow shell.
Which brings us to Section 4, what Chapter 11 actually means, restructuring versus shutdown.
Because they have those tangible assets, the cash, the inventory, this bankruptcy filing is not necessarily a death sentence. It is incredibly important to distinguish between the different types of bankruptcy because honestly, the headlines can be super misleading. Chapter 11 is specifically a restructuring process. It's a legal framework designed to give a company a little bit of breathing room. It does not mean an immediate shutdown. It doesn't mean Rebel Ice Cream is going to instantly disappear from Walmart and Kroger shelves tomorrow. Instead, it allows the company to keep operating, keep paying its employees, and keep selling its product while it formally negotiates its massive financial obligations with its creditors. Oh, and here is a massive wild card in this whole scenario. That $23.8 million judgment, it's still actively under appeal. Rebel is aggressively disputing Van Leeuwen's claim, and what that means is the final ultimate dollar amount they end up owing is not necessarily set in stone yet. If the appeal goes their way, actually, scratch that, even if it's just partially reduced, that catastrophic balance sheet gap we looked at earlier could shrink or even disappear entirely. That adds a huge layer of uncertainty to their ultimate financial fate.
In Section 5, can Rebel survive? The road ahead.
So, taking all of this into account, the math, the assets, the appeal, we really have to ask, can Rebel Creamery actually survive this? Because they are facing a brutal multi-front war right now. First, they have to successfully execute a complex financial restructuring. Second, they have to fight a high-stakes, super expensive, ongoing legal battle in the appeals court. Third, they have to somehow convince massive retailers to keep them on the shelves during all this chaos. But you know what? Perhaps the hardest operational hurdle is that forced packaging redesign. In the freezer aisle, branding is literally everything. Your packaging is what creates customer recognition. Redesigning the very look of your product while fighting bankruptcy, that is an incredibly risky and expensive endeavor. This whole situation really highlights a vital lesson for absolutely any business. This is so much more than just a story about rival ice cream brands duking it out. For consumer brands, intellectual property, like the exact shade of pastel on your pint or the specific font of your logo, it's not just some abstract theoretical legal issue for lawyers to debate in a boardroom. It is a real, tangible asset, and if it's challenged, it can rapidly become an existential financial crisis that directly chokes your cash flow and puts your entire company at risk. To summarize this entire financial autopsy, let's just look at the numbers clearly on a single screen. You have a final court award of $23.785 million, completely colliding with reported assets of just $13.7 million, which drives total liabilities way up to $23.85 million. The end result? A crippling $10.07 million gap. This is exactly how a single legal judgment regarding visual packaging can completely shatter a company's balance sheet and basically force a successful national brand into an emergency restructuring. Which leaves us with this final thought. Now that the survival battle has officially begun, what happens next? Can Rebel Creamery really leverage the protection of Chapter 11 to successfully restructure their debt, win their appeal, redesign their iconic look, and ultimately rebuild their business? Or will this multi-million-dollar packaging dispute be the deep freeze that permanently melts the brand? It is an absolutely fascinating corporate thriller, and we will definitely be watching the freezer aisles to see how it all ends. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep asking questions, and I'll catch you next time.